Thank you, Charlene. It's a great pleasure to join you in this conversation and share with you some of the thoughts and reflections coming from the current context of risks that we are facing in our region, and also how we can link this context to this aspiration of advancing towards the disability inclusive environmental justice. And first, I would like to thank our friend and colleague Carlos Kaiser for inviting us to this meeting, to our co-discussants, Sebastian Joller from the McGill University, Marcy, great to see you again, from the World Institute of Disabilities, and our moderator, Shailene, thank you. First, I think that it's very clear from what our colleagues have already mentioned, that disasters have a differentiated impact on different individuals and population groups, and it is very clear too that the impacts on these particular vulnerable groups already exacerbates existing inequalities. It is also very legitimate to say that the policies that we advance for disaster risk reduction are policies to reduce inequalities, are policies definitely linked to poverty reduction, and very clearly to promote inclusion. When it comes to the environment and the climate risk, we also know that these impacts, and what we have seen based on evidence-based information, is how people living with disabilities are disproportionately affected. And we have seen that since the very beginning, even with numbers that were captured after the earthquake in Japan, where we witnessed how mortality risks among people living with disabilities doubled the average of mortality in the whole districts affected by the earthquake and the tsunami. And I think and I recognize that the importance of linking the efforts not only of the Sendai framework, but also in coherence with the climate agenda and the urban agenda are quite relevant for achieving this inclusiveness and meaningful participation in the definition of the disaster risk reduction and resilience policies at the national and local levels. Disability inclusion cannot be an afterthought. I mean, it's clear that the needs of people with disability must be integrated into our thinking, and must be accounted right from the beginning of the process of planning processes and governance mechanisms, and also in keeping with the inclusion disability strategy that has already been adopted by the United Nations. United Nations Office for Disaster Reduction is actively working to bring the disability inclusion to the forefront of our work. And similarly to the Paris Agreement, the Sendai framework is very explicit in a sense and how inclusion is integrated in all the actions of disaster reduction. The Sendai framework, for example, is clear in mentioning that the role of the stakeholders should be shifted from viewing stakeholders as victims and vulnerable groups to agents of change, and focusing not in their disabilities, but in their abilities to contribute to the resilience agenda. Now, this is something that we have been discussing very closely with Carlos and the Latin American network of people living with disabilities on how we can promote this participation, and not only from the physical inclusion view, but also to their contributions to the substantive discussions on the key regional mechanisms that we promote from UNDRR, like, for example, a regional platform for disaster risk reduction, where all the priorities for disaster reduction are agreed among governments, and how the people living with disabilities participate in these sessions, contributing with their views and knowledge on how, for example, we can improve the resilience infrastructure of other countries, how we can improve the building of resilience on the local level, and different aspects that we are gathering all this knowledge and trying and supporting these contributions to become policies. The Sendai framework is very explicit in the sense, for example, they make 5 explicit mentions in all the document on this role. They say, for example, in one of the paragraphs, that people living with disabilities and their organizations are key to assess disaster risks and to design and implement plans tailored to specific requirements, taking into consideration the principle of universal design. We have also mentions into inclusions in relation to policies, plans, and standards. When the Sendai framework, for example, mentions that the disaster disaster reduction practices must be multi-hazard, multi-sectoral, inclusive, and accessible to be effective and efficient. The policies require also the dissemination of disaggregated data in order to build these systems. Call for disaggregated data that includes population identified by sex, age, and disability, for example. And we have started seeing these type of advancements reflected in policies at the country levels. And one of the important things to mention in this process is the role of the structured contributions of the organizations of people living with disabilities. And this is why it's so important that the existence of the Latin American network for people living with disabilities exists and interacts and continuously make this agenda present in all these discussions. The Latin American network and the work, for example, of particularly Inclusiva, in bringing these experiences at the local level, connecting with mayors, bringing practices and methodologies for including the concerns of people with disabilities when these policies are being designed at the local level and at the national level, is a reflection of this structured approach from people living with disabilities to the countries and to the region. And I think that this needs to continue in this way. The association, the collaboration, and the pressure to contribute to these policies. The commitments from countries are already there, but it is important on the other side to have an active network, an active participation of organizations to bring this agenda to become part of these planning processes when countries are preparing national plans for disaster reduction, when they are addressing strategies also at the regional level. I would like to also mention another thing that is linked to the existing context in which we are now operating. And this is something that we are also stressing at the moment when we are approaching governments, and is referred to the complexities that we are facing today in terms of the risks that we are observing. We now are observing the coexistence of a climate emergency that becomes an environmental risk in itself, but also coexisting with other type of risks that the Sendai framework also addresses and calls for the attention, which are the biological risks or human-induced risks, in addition to the ones that are related to the natural hazards. So all this combination now is bringing a complex environment of interconnected risks that in many occasions are observed to have cascade effects across the whole society, and is revealing the different weaknesses that we have to attend the general population, but in particular people living with disabilities. And the COVID-19 pandemic has been a very clear example of this situation. And we are learning, and this process is providing valuable lessons on the importance of improving such inclusive governance mechanisms for addressing disaster risks. As an input for your discussions today, I also would like to mention the recent summary, the co-chair summary of the 2022 Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction that took place in Bali recently in May this year. And Marcy was there, and people from the Latin American network was there. Carlos also attended. And the call as a result of this meeting is very clear in the sense of recognizing this complexity of risks that calls for reconfiguring the risk governance in a sense that, addressing what Marcy had mentioned, we cannot operate in silos anymore. The type of risks that are interconnected, it has cascade effects that involve more than one sector in a particular moment, requires a multi-sector approach, not only from different ministries, but also from different levels of government, requires legislating in disaster reduction in different how to articulate this type of breaking silos approach, and also bringing public finance along to these processes. And the chair summary highlights the need to stress the efforts for meeting the climate ambition, embracing the call of something that also came from the regional meetings in people living with disabilities, and it was a call of these policies have to be inclusive. These policies call for nothing about us without us. This is the adage that was taken during the global platform. Fostering universal early warning coverage and strengthening the SENDI framework midterm review, where all these aspects must be highlighted with the support of people living with disabilities, participating as part of these processes, contributing with their views on what has worked in the implementation of SENDI framework, what are the gaps, and what we need to do more. I would like to finalize this intervention by encouraging you to bring your collective knowledge to the upcoming regional platform for disaster reduction in the Americas and the Caribbean, the regional platform 2023, that is going to be hosted by the government of Uruguay from the 28th of February to the 2nd of March of 2023. And the focus of this regional platform is going to be on science and technology for addressing disaster risk reduction. And we are already discussing with a group of the networks in the region, with Carlos, how we can, again, bring the participation of people living with disabilities in the core discussions, substantive discussions on how we can build resilience in the region. So I wish you a wonderful webinar, and thank you for the attention and opportunity to join you here.